Hello.
Hello.
We're live.
We're so live.
Hello and welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. This is not therapy for very, very many reasons.
So many.
I'm Brandon Testers. This is Caitlin
Good
Miller.
Mhm.
We are both licensed therapists, but again, this is not therapy.
Very clearly.
I
I love that line so much.
Marie, who usually hosts this, is not going to be with us today, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
And so usually Marie does the thing now. It's been so many months since I've done the thing that I've kind of forgotten the order of things. And yes, usually the whole "it's not therapy" comes after we introduce ourselves. What this is just an open conversation. We're here, we're available, we're chatting, we'll be chatting with each other.
Mm-hmm.
For those of you who are here, thank you for being here with us. And we would invite you, encourage you. We appreciate when people jump into the comments and say things to us.
We love it.
We do. This can be, a Q&A kind of a thing, but it doesn't have to be that either. And whatever it is that we're talking about, whatever topic that is, does not have to be what you are talking about in the comments. We'll go wherever, just like any conversation. Everything that one person in the conversation is saying impacts the other person. We're all paying attention to each other. Keep in mind that this stream is saved as a video on demand after the fact, meaning, you can watch it on YouTube or Twitch or whatever. And that includes comments. So if you're commenting whatever account you're in, your Google account or Twitch account or whatever, the comment will be posted under that account's name and will be part of the video on demand for later viewing. So keep that in mind. We work at a group therapy practice called Effective Artistry in Illinois. We do individual, couples, family counseling, family therapy.
Hopefully groups someday.
Definitely.
And we
groups
have
someday.
fantastic ideas about groups.
Definitely groups someday, yes.
We also have some neurodiversity affirming coaches who do executive functioning coaching, and they can work with people anywhere in the world with a moderate to stable internet connection.
Yeah, we specialize in neurodiversity affirming methodology, and for therapy at the moment we can only work with people in the state of Illinois, although hopefully that will expand later. But we do have executive functioning coaches who can work with people anywhere.
And that would be explicitly coaching, not therapy.
Right, they're separate people. Therapists don't coach and vice versa. Yeah.
We're happy you're here.
Yeah, thanks for being here. We usually have Marie Moran with us. She'll hopefully be back next week. I think that's all the announcement-y type things.
Yeah, and if someone's interested in working with us, they can go to our website and fill out the contact form or whatever. And we can also help with general resources and getting a fit for a therapist or anything like that.
Yeah. Cool. Anything else you can think of? All right, that's pretty much it.
What's the meaning of life, Brandon?
I'll be keeping an eye on comments, so we'll respond as things are put there. But yeah, what's the meaning of life?
What's on your mind lately, Brandon? How are you feeling?
I'm good. I had a good weekend with my family. Took a couple. I've been experimenting lately with doing this thing that I can't quite say that it's meditating and I can't quite say that it's napping.
Active imagination?
No.
Daydreaming?
No. But I did that on Saturday and on Sunday. It was nice.
I was just thinking about trying to do something like that. How do you do it? What's your process?
Honestly, I don't have a whole lot of a process. I sit down or lay down, whatever's comfortable, and I close my eyes and I tell myself that barring some kind of emergency or whatever, I won't be
What does that look like?
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. Yeah. I sit or lay, whatever's most comfortable. I close my eyes and I tell myself that barring any emergency, I will not be opening my eyes again for at least 20 to 30 minutes. I don't time it or set a timer. It's just that what I find for myself, and this happens for people a lot, it seems, is that in those early, like the beginning part of either trying to take a nap or trying to meditate or whatever, there's a lot of evaluation going on about, is this going to work? Is this worth it? What else should I be doing or could I be doing? Whatever. So by giving myself that rule of this is what I'm doing no matter what's happening, it frees me up from having to do that evaluation of like, I should just stop this and do something else.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I mean, that's what helps me get into it. But really what's happening is very much just like a pretty basic mindfulness meditation. I don't attempt to control my thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
I just observe them non-judgmentally.
Mm-hmm.
I have some things that I do that I think could theoretically be fun to talk about, but are not like, I don't think they're important to this process. It's just how I'm doing things in my head when I'm thinking. But yeah, it's just observing my own thoughts, including observing my observation of my thoughts without judgment. And what'll happen is that, like, over time, what do I get out of that? That's a good question. But let me finish this and then I'll answer that. What'll happen is that over time, my thoughts become less and less. I track them less and less. And so far, I haven't been able to do it a ton of times yet, but so far, every time I've done it, towards the end, what I'm guessing around like the 20-minute mark-ish, I get into this mode where, and everybody has experiences like this, where it's like, I don't think I was asleep, but I'm not positive I wasn't asleep. You know, like,
I love that state.
Yeah. Where it's like, I'm no longer, what it feels like without being able to confirm it, because that's the point at the end when I get into that place, is that it feels like I'm still thinking, but no longer remembering anything that I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Where usually I am remembering what I'm thinking and tracking like how I got from A to B or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And when I notice that, hey, I don't remember what I was just thinking, I'll go back and try and like reconstruct what was I was thinking this. And in this place though, by the end, I think calling it trance is a valid use of that word.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I believe that I'm conscious, but I can't prove it. And that's kind of the point. Part of the whole thing about it not being judgmental is I'm not trying to nap, but I'm also not trying to not fall asleep. I'm not trying anything. I'm just letting whatever happens.
Do you what do you get out of that?
There's a lot of different language I could use, so I guess I'm trying to like a soft reboot, I guess is.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a concept called non-sleep deep rest that, as far as I know, comes from a guy called Andrew Huberman, who has a podcast, and you can look into his stuff. The idea, though, being that we can observe using the right instruments and whatever, we can observe that there are states where people's brains begin to give off the brain waves that you give off when you're asleep, even though they are not asleep. So there's a state that he refers to as non-sleep deep rest, where your brain is, at least in some ways, behaving in the way that it behaves while you're asleep, even though you are awake.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about a bunch of different ways to get to that: meditation, a lot of things that are very traditional,
Mm-hmm.
meditation and prayer, but also engaging in, reading or other activities for people.
Mm-hmm.
So I think of it as that. I think calling it trance is also, when I'm talking about trance and hypnosis, I'm using the Milton Erickson framework,
Mm-hmm.
like his way of using language, and it's definitely trance
Mm-hmm.
by that way of talking about it.
How would Milton Erickson define trance?
Trance is when you are paying a disproportionate amount of attention to something in particular that that your attention was called to. In Ericksonian hypnosis, the idea is that our attentional we've talked about a bunch. We have these algorithms that dictate where our attention goes.
Mm-hmm.
And those things are theoretically attempting to be as proportionate as possible. Like the thing which is
Mm-hmm.
the most important to notice gets noticed, and the thing which is the second most important to notice gets noticed, and so on. But sometimes we get real focused in on something. We're paying very close attention, getting a lot of data about a thing that we can't consciously say is like important to be paying attention to.
Mm-hmm.
And in particular, sometimes that's because someone's called our attention to something. That if I tell someone like, here, hold this leaf and look very closely at it, look at the veins running through it, whatever, I'm guiding your attention to it. And now you're paying more attention to the leaf than seems like it would inherently be useful.
Mm-hmm.
So that's hypnosis. And then trance is the state of paying closer attention or more attention to something than it seems to warrant. And in that way of talking about it, all of us are in and out of trance constantly, all day long. Like, it's not a rare thing. It's not some like super suggestible state or anything like that. There's a lot of talk about auto-hypnosis, self-hypnosis in that approach.
Are you judging yourself right now? Sometimes when you slow down your speech, I don't know, I'm curious.
I don't
We're
think
wondering
so.
about how, what's the word for it?
Well, there's
how
another part of
effective.
like the what do I get out of it that I want to get to.
Yeah, what do you
that
get out of it, Brandon?
I think might have been what you were picking up on, is like trying to track to make sure to get back to that.
Mm-hmm.
So there's it is unclear why, like what purpose sleep serves in evolutionary terms, right? Like, obviously we are constructed in a certain way and we know what happens if humans don't sleep. We have a lot of data about that. What we don't really have solid answers to is why, like, if a living being spends a third of its life in a completely vulnerable state, something important must be happening in that state.
And I would say, like, really important.
Sure, yeah, that's
because it's a dumbass state to have.
Yes, you are very vulnerable to environmental dangers when you are sleeping, and it's not clear exactly what that is. Meaning that even though for humans there are many things that happen when we're asleep that can't happen in any other way, there's nothing we can identify as being like this could not even theoretically happen without sleep. So. But obviously,
there has been no
most
explicit
life
utility.
Has evolved in a way to like sleep. So of course, there's many theories about why we would sleep, and I'm sure that many of them are all like concurrently accurate and useful and whatever. But one in particular that I think is very interesting is what's been found in machine learning, which is the field that studies like AI, like trying to create artificial thinking. Right? What's been found is that when you create a cybernetic system, which cybernetic means self-observing and adjusting. A cybernetic system, that term comes from family therapy, actually, not from like robotics and computers and whatever. A cybernetic system, that's what I could be wrong about that. That's what I've been told.
You're probably right about it.
Well, I mean, I haven't like done the research. It's just what someone taught me.
Yeah.
But when a system monitors itself and can make adjustments to itself, what'll happen is that sooner or later, inevitably, it hits a feedback loop where it's trying to reference some information that it doesn't have. And then in order to try to get that information, it's trying to reference information that it doesn't have pertaining to the original thing, or you'll go in a long loop, right? That to solve A, I need B, to solve B, I need C. And however many steps you get around to solve whatever, I need A. And so you just keep looping and looping. And these loops, they will take all of the resources available to that system. And in machine learning, the only way, once it's in a loop, the only way to get it out is to shut the system down and restart it. So one of the theories about sleep is that humans are like this, that all thinking, all cognition, anything that has any element of cognition is like this, that it is possible or perhaps even inevitable that at a certain point your thoughts will get stuck in a loop where you're trying to solve a problem that you can't solve without solving another problem, and you can't solve that without solving the initial problem. So when I refer to looping, that's what I'm talking about. Rumination, I think, is a version of looping. Panic attacks is a version of looping. So one of the theories about sleep is that it is a built-in reset, that when you start looping and nothing can get you out of that except shutting the system down, well, sleep is shutting the system down and then booting it back up. So what do I get out of that? The meditation thing? To me, it's a soft reboot that, like, without going to sleep, fully going to sleep, it's a way of kind of whatever things I'm thinking about, have been thinking about, whatever things I'm holding in working memory, kind of carrying with me through the day, trying to remember about, all of that gets wiped. And then I start fresh. So especially in the afternoon for me, I get very tired around 1, 2, 3 o'clock quite frequently. I have some theories about some of that. That if I do it right around then after I'm done, I will feel much more like fresh-eyed and energetic. Maybe is not the word, but I don't feel as tired. I don't feel like.
I like the term soft reboot when I do something like that. It feels very similar. It's like, I know this is technically still the same day and I have like a similar cognition, but the cognition feels softly rebooted.
Yeah. Almost like I can see things more freshly, you know, like things
eye drops
feel more novel to me. Well, honestly, I have wondered how much might be part of that is that literally just the physical act of closing my eyes for 20 to 30 minutes, you know, like, because my eyes, I think, get pretty dried out and strained and, you know, so there's some rest there too. Because a lot of what I notice as tiredness, and this I've found to be true of a lot of people, a lot of what I notice as tiredness is right around this area. That I think might literally correlate to just like using the muscles that you use for vision, and they get tired and whatever. So I think that might be part of it too. But certainly,
I find it so much restful. For example, to have a like really good sleep mask over my eyes.
Yeah.
It's interesting the light.
Well, again, there's a whole like, I don't know if you call it a field or whatever, called chronobiology that I know very little to nothing about. That's all about like the rhythms of biology, how light and food and sleep and whatever impact different things. Again, that's the thing that Andrew Huberman talks about a lot. So there are a lot of different suggestions around light therapy and what kind of light and how you should be using your eyes, and etc. Some interesting stuff. But yeah, for me, especially on the weekends, I will sometimes get into a place where I'm feeling very trapped. I have 3 young kids, and you know,
they're so
I'm running
cute.
them around to like birthday parties, and it's not like one of them is young enough that we still do afternoon naps, so we have to plan around being at the house for that and whatever.
Sorry, I'm not trying to dismiss the costly parts of parenting.
And I'm not trying to like make it sound like it's terrible. It's just this.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll get into this mode on the weekend where I'm not thinking about like what should I do next or what do I want to do or whatever. It's just purely reactive. Like I'm waiting until a kid needs something or wants something or whatever. And this has been helpful for me in kind of breaking that pattern, especially after years of living in a pandemic. You know, there were years there where our weekends were like, you know, we weren't going to the store or anything. It really was just being at our house with our family and then going outside and doing, you know, going to the park or whatever. So that's what I'm experimenting with. I read a book recently that one of the characters meditates and another one of the main characters doesn't, and they're talking about it and the benefit of it. And there was this passage where the character who meditates a lot was like stumped by the other person's question of what is the point of meditating? Like, why do you do this? Whatever. Because it was something that's so inherent to them, they hadn't even considered that that's like something that would need to be justified. And they think about it for a minute and then they're like, for the same reason that you bathe, you know, like in the same way that you cleanse your body and keep it clean, meditation is like cleaning your mind, you know, it's hygiene for your mind. And that language resonated with me.
Well, and also I think one of the issues too with also like incentivizing particularly neurodivergent people to meditate is I think if there's a lot of like talk around trying to describe the phenomenological experience of meditating, I don't know, like you don't know what like a fresh pear tastes like until you eat a fresh pear, and you could have someone say, well, it's juicy and it has these like undertones of kind of a floral thing and like the texture is great. It can feel a little like whatever. And it's like, okay, well, whatever. But then actually doing it. And I noticed that people find different things out of meditation, but pretty much anyone I follow who meditates is like, you have to do it. Not in like a judgy way, but in sort of a like, I find this so incredibly valuable. And then like
Sure.
the overlap between like transcendental meditation and religion and spirituality, as well as like philosophy, and then the like active imagination and half like deep rest and blah blah. There's just, I feel like it's just a bunch of versions of different people saying meditating is good, but then like putting different spins on it, which
Sure.
I think is kind of what you're doing right now.
Yeah, well, and that's part of why I'm saying these things, is because I am someone that my whole life, when people have talked about meditating, like, not, I tried it. I remember very specifically trying to do it the way that they taught us in like some fourth grade, somebody, and it didn't work. It says, is there a spiritual aspect to what you're doing or not really? I don't know if you're into stuff like that. I am into stuff like that, spirituality. And I guess I'd say that, yes, probably there's a spiritual, but not in any, like, I'm not, there's no intentionality of spirituality to it for me.
To me, like, the idea, and I'm not, like, you're welcome to give me any counters, Brandon, but I feel like sometimes what people would call meditating and spirituality is more of just like, oh my gosh, I just totally lost it. Oh, experiencing a sense of awe, similar to when people like visit the Grand Canyon or something, and that it's more of like perspective and almost like the soft reboot thing versus like, I have come from a vision that this is the way the world works, and in 1,000 years, or whatever. Like,
well, yeah, spirituality, spiritual, spirit. That's one of those words that it just means. It's kind of like romance or whatever, where like people use it as though we all have an agreement on what it means. But if you ask any individual person what exactly do they mean, people have a hard time answering that question.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the times spirituality just kind of means it's not something I can explain scientifically, but it is something I notice, observationally or energetically or something like that. I'm happy to talk about spirituality. I really am. I think it's a fascinating subject.
Well, I would love, I guess, something that I would think of as more practical too for like whoever I perceive our audience might be, as well as myself, as well as my clients, even though this is clearly not therapy, is to talk about ways to incentivize people who identify with having ADHD or autism or ADHD or whatever it is to experience more of these liminal states, because I think the general culture is like, well, to meditate, you have to focus, you have to sit upright, you have to do a guided meditation, it has to be a really annoying voice for 30 minutes, you have to do it 5 minutes a day, you have like, or whatever, all of these things that I think make neurodivergent people less likely to engage with it. So one of the things I liked about your anecdote is it's sort of like, okay, this is the way I'm designing meditation for myself right now, and it feels good, but it's not like this is the 1, 2, 3, and you'll love it. And I don't know. Does that make sense?
It does, and I'll say, I think
there's another question too.
Do you think there is something sort of greater out there? I think they're
absolutely
referencing like what it means, spirituality, whatever.
Yeah.
Which is also an interesting question.
Which was part of the awe in the Grand Canyon thing.
I think, well, okay, for one, when you're talking about all these people that talk about meditation and how important it is, there's some survivorship bias there, right? Like,
oh, totally, yeah.
There's people who try meditating and it doesn't work for them. They don't go on to talk about meditation. So anyone who's talking about meditation is
I have heard some neurodivergent people talk about meditation as like, I don't really want to say the exact things with it, but like sort of like some version of useless.
Well, I've heard plenty of that, including myself, and to say to speak to what you were saying earlier, I think one of the big things about that, at least for me, is that people talk about meditation and say it's about like the absence of thought. That many types of meditation, that what you're attempting to do is empty your mind and not be thinking, which I don't think is actually possible. But I think what is possible, the closest thing that I can tell that's possible is like what I'm talking about is that I either am not observing my thoughts, or if I am not remembering them past the moment in which I observe them.
Which to me feels really liberating, especially with such a strong and often negative thought stream.
Yeah, well, I mean, yes. Like when you're looping, rebooting in some way, somehow, and there are many different ways to do that. I think neurodivergent people who identify as neurodivergent, by and large, almost by definition, are people who think of themselves as being deficient in some ways, and in most cases, I'll say, like by far most cases, part of what people who identify as neurodivergent will view as being bad about themselves is that they're not productive enough, that they don't get enough done.
Breaks my heart.
Which I think is what correlates to that whole dismissing meditation. It's like dismissing any form of rest, right? That like doing something enjoyable is not something I should do.
But then I feel like the second stage for some people is like, oh, this super productive person said on this podcast that if you meditate 5 minutes a day, you can be more productive. So now I'm going to try to meditate. And then all the rules around meditation and trying to engage with it to be like, oh.
Well, I think in large part how meditation and a lot of like spiritual things generally are discussed is in a person sharing their own experience as though it is in some way applicable to other people, right? That like,
well, and the tricky thing about it is that in some ways it is quite applicable, and because it's not like provable and there's not really a science.
We don't know that it's applicable.
It's applicable in the sense of people on average do have some similar experiences. It doesn't mean that they're true or it's the way things are or that it's the same.
Well, sure, but whatever, like me talking about what I've been doing, I'm not saying that as advice to people to give this a shot.
Yeah.
That if you do this, this is how it will impact you. And I do think that's part of the problem you're talking about is that meditation and spirituality, science and research stuff is discussed this way too, but generally when people are talking about this stuff, they're talking about it as like advice to people. You should try this, or if you do that, it'll help you. And when it's research, it's based on like what the research has said, which is useful to an extent. And when it's spirituality, it's usually based on a person's own experience. Right? They're like, this is what's happened to me, which is also useful to an extent. But yes, when it's presented as though there are a set of rules, that this is how you know it's working, or do it this way and it will work, then that means there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. And as soon as it's that, it now becomes, to just skip a bunch of stuff, it becomes something that is productive, basically. Doing it is now, you're thinking of it, interacting with it, it requires the same resources as doing anything else that you think of as productive, as something that you should do, which ruins the benefit that even theoretically could exist.
That reminds me about how some people respond to the whole wave of the self-care stuff, where it's like, oh, well, it should feel refreshing to do this really specific thing, but then if it's like, well, this person said to do this really specific self-care thing in this way, and it has to be for this duration of time with these things, and I have to feel this way, then it does become like a secret job. Sure.
Yeah. I mean, I would talk about it as eudaimonic and hedonic, all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
But one of the like most common judgments I will hear people say is, I shouldn't judge myself, because that is a statement of judgment. You're judging yourself for judging yourself. And so even things like in mindfulness, just observe your thoughts, don't judge them, will then put people in a position where they are judging their thoughts because they're evaluating whether or not those thoughts are a judgment. So judgment is not about, to me in this particular case, it's not about feeling good or feeling bad about something. It's about evaluating a thing as opposed to just observing a thing. And if you are trying to determine whether something counts as some category of thing, then you are by definition evaluating.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're trying not to judge yourself, that ruins it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you judge your thoughts. Oh well.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm saying. Maybe I fall asleep. Maybe I don't fall asleep. Maybe I am self-critical. Maybe I'm not. Maybe I sit there the whole time and don't feel anything different than usual, and I'm just tracking my thoughts the entire time.
Mm-hmm.
It, it. I think there's some stuff to this, like mechanically, like what it does in terms of where your attention is directed and what you're paying attention. And I think that's. Let me back up a bit, because people always do this. Like whatever it is we're talking about, we're going to call it meditation or non-sleep deep rest or whatever. Everybody does things like this.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter what it looks like for an individual. For a lot of people, myself included, playing video games is this.
Mm-hmm.
Reading books is this. Going for a jog
Mm-hmm.
can be this. There are a lot of different ways that people get into it. And so, like, putting parameters around any of those things, meditation is what you should be doing. Well, then, for a person who playing an hour of a video game in a day gives them the benefit of what for other people they're getting out of an hour of meditation.
Mm-hmm.
If you tell them they should meditate for an hour a day, well, they got to stop playing the video game to make time in their day for the hour of meditation.
Well, to me, it maybe makes more sense then to talk about activities where at the end of it you feel more energy versus activities where at the end of it you feel less energy.
I think that is a great thing to talk about. That's not quite what I'm trying to talk about. Like,
can you clarify?
I'm not trying to get across with what I'm discussing. That's what I was saying. It's not that I have more energy after, although I do feel less tired. Because feeling energized is another thing that I think is super important. It comes up a lot, especially with people who take ADHD medication, which I do.
Mm-hmm.
Feeling energized is a matter of perception, right? Like, not about some observable, definable, here is a store of energy that you have access to or don't, and now you have access to a large one. And I know that I talk about energy all the time as it's useful to conceptualize it that way, and can also be problematic depending on like a particular individual's patterns and whatever, where sometimes the things that you do that make you feel energized, and then you go and spend a bunch of energy that isn't the kind of energy that you really have, and you push yourself too much. And I don't know I don't want to get into like a whole long, like people will talk about working out is energizing. And I agree, it is. But it also takes energy to do. So when you're done and you feel more energized, if that is the case, that's not everybody's experience or experience with all workouts. If you finish working out and you're feeling more energized, that's not about physical energy. You just spent a bunch of physical energy that you did not recoup or recover. And now resources are going to be, depending on the kind of workout, resources are going to be dedicated to like repairing damage that you caused to yourself during that workout. So in that way, it's not energizing.
How would you compare that to your experience of these sort of meditative / non-sleep deep rest states you've been experimenting with recently?
So for me, these things are not energizing. They're two things. One, I think a lot of the like feeling less tired, like I said, has to do with literally resting my eyes and whatever. But the other, I think, is not about energy. It's about working memory. That we talk about working memory as a space, a finite space. You can only hold so much in consciousness at a given time. And from when you wake up, there's stuff in there, right? Like being conscious, you are consciously noticing things. The further you get from when you first woke up, the larger percentage of that working memory is full of things that aren't current. That like, oh, got to remember to get to the store or whatever it is, right? That like, as time moves forward from after you woke up, all the things you're conscious of, most of that you let go of almost immediately or pretty quickly. But some of it sticks because it's something you got to remember for later, or it's relevant, or it gets stuck in your head, or whatever. So as time passes, more and more of your working memory is taken up by that stuff that you're holding on to from earlier. So to me, this flushes it all out. So that when I'm done with it, my working memory, it's like first waking up in the morning, not in terms of feeling energized, but in terms of having my full awareness available to start getting filled up again.
And what do you think the utility is in the context of this conversation to point out the difference between feeling more energized and feeling like your working memory is kind of reset?
Well, they're two different resources, and like I said, I think there's a danger in conflating these things, because especially super common, like we were talking about, is that if I feel more energized, I act as though I have more energy. And so we'll run into problems where, man, I only slept for 2 hours last night, but I feel energized. And so I just keep going as though I had all the rest that I needed, where that's not the case.
So what would you say to a person like that about their like real energy versus real, I don't know how to say it.
Well, so when I work on what I call energy management with people, and I think this does fall under the category of what a lot of people would consider to be spiritual. I think a lot of spirituality is about, not all of it by any means, but a lot of it is about energy, because energy is not composed of matter, quite literally. Like it is not a thing which takes up space in the physical universe. Like this is true of electricity and whatever, not just the energy we're talking about that I have as a person. So you're observing something that we're calling energy, but that's not actually what you're observing because you can't, right? Like I was saying, when I feel tired, what I'm actually observing, some portion of that is how the musculature around my eyes is feeling. Anyway, when I work on energy management with people, I always make it clear that whatever we're going to call energy is definitely more than one thing, and we don't want to conflate those things. We want to make sure that we understand that they're distinct, and that there are things which can give me one kind of energy while taking away a certain kind of energy. And that, in fact, literally like the physical law of conservation of energy, that there is no way to like create energy, only to transfer it, right? That I can do something which takes physical energy that restores my cognitive energy, and I can do something that takes cognitive energy that restores my emotional energy or whatever. And I will start with people usually by giving them 4 types, but I want to make it very clear that it is not quantified. I don't think it is quantifiable. It's purely about what's useful to a given individual. So, but I do think it's important that you don't just think of it all the same way, particularly because almost all of us these days, we observe things cognitively. Certainly this seems to be true for people who identify as neurodivergent. Our cognitive awareness of things is a lot higher priority to us than any other kind, which means that a lot of the time when I'm feeling tired, it's like cognitively exhausted, but my body still has plenty of energy. You know, when I'm trying to go to sleep, but I am restless or whatever. And vice versa, that there are times that I'm like, wow, I'm so rested and energized, when actually my body is barely hanging on. And so then I keep pushing because I feel like cognitive. I'm like, I don't understand why I would rest. I got so much energy. And it's not until much later that it's like, oh. And even then, people will still not think of it as like, yeah, because my body is exhausted. Same with what part of why I'm so strong against the idea of motivation in the way that people usually use it. Because mostly it's this concept that people have that if you think the right thoughts, you can give yourself more energy. I just need to get motivated, by which people mean like, if I think about this correctly, then I'll have the energy to do the thing. And there's some truth to that in the sense of how you're perceiving it, and you know, but it doesn't literally, there's a reason we have to eat, that all living things need to take in calories.
Mm-hmm.
That calorie is a unit of measurement of energy, like stored energy. It's how much energy is released when a thing is burned. And it doesn't matter what you're thinking. You can get into places where you perceive yourself as being energized. I mean, literally, people work themselves to death and starve themselves to death thinking that there's no problem going on. Like, that's part of what happens in fatal cases of anorexia or eating disorders generally, is a person who, for whatever reason, is feeling as though they have the energy to continue to function when, literally, medically speaking, they don't.
So heartbreaking.
It is.
Did we answer do you think there is something sort of greater out there?
I didn't. You did. You said yes.
Okay.
And I wasn't sure if that's a question that was being asked to be answered or just as an explanation of what that commenter means by spiritual, like as an example. Because in truly Brandon frustrating way, I don't know, that's a complicated.
Your answer would be no, right?
No, my answer would depend on what we mean by the question. That's
Which
what I
is
mean by
totally
being very
fine.
frustrating.
Oh yeah, no, I was curious about something.
Okay.
I can't read it.
I was curious about your thoughts. And Vast Insider there said that feels true to me. It feels like when you restart a computer after exercising, it feels like you don't have so many programs running in the background. Just on that meditation, like one form of what people will call meditation is moving meditation, where you're engaging your body in some kind of activity and still then through that activity somehow reach that same or a similar kind of space. Curious about our thoughts. Here's what I think. I'll answer it as genuinely as I can answer it, even though I am judging myself for how ridiculous my answer is. I think that the human experience is an axiomatic experience, meaning that an axiomatic system is one where there are certain underlying principles, axioms, that you just have to accept. You can't prove them, you just have to accept them. But that once you accept those axioms, everything else can be built on top of those axioms. Oh, okay, I guess I'm wondering two things. Do you think there's a creator, or if there isn't, why do you think people seem to yearn for something greater like that? Oh man. I think and talk about this all the time, and for some reason I'm finding myself hesitant to do it on the stream, I guess. But
I wonder if that relates to anything we were discussing in messages.
Maybe. I don't remember what you're referring to, but probably. Here's one of the things that is, to me, axiomatic about being a human. You have to accept that there is such a thing as reality, that things exist outside of your ability to conceptualize them, observe them, whatever, right? Like, and I don't mean in some very spiritual way necessarily. I mean, like, even though I have not been to most places in the world, I believe that those places exist. Even though I'm here right now, I still believe that my home exists even right now in this moment. There's something in philosophy called solipsism, which is this concept that, like, I can't know that anything is real besides myself. And it's been explored in a bunch of different ways. And there's truth to that, right? Like, everything you perceive is filtered through your perception. So consciously, how can you prove that your perception is based on something which actually exists? It's called, there's the brain in the jar or brain in a vat thought experiment that, theoretically speaking, if we had the technology and the information necessary, we could put a brain into a thing. If we could keep it alive and stimulate the neurons exactly the way we could make that brain perceive anything, make it feel as though it had a body, and etc. So the thought experiment is that you could be a brain in a vat. You can't prove that you're not. So this comes in, people talk about the Matrix and whatever. To me, as someone who has gotten lost in those thoughts, especially when I was younger, that's part of what brought me around to like utility. Like, why does it matter? Like, am I going to start acting differently, behaving differently based on my answer to this question? I'm just going to act as though the things that I'm perceiving are based on an actual reality outside of myself. So that's part of my answer to why does it seem like people yearn for something. I think that something fundamental and intrinsic to the human experience is learning to accept consciously that things exist outside of your ability to be conscious of them. And then once you accept that, it opens up a lot of stuff. You can go a lot of, like, anything could exist if you don't have to directly observe it. This is a lot of like faith and whatever that we're talking about. So in one sense, I think there's almost an archetypal thing of like, it's a way that as people are conceptualizing, things exist beyond my ability to observe them, beyond my direct current observation, that then there's like this archetypal, and some of that means like an overarching purpose or a being which represents that overarching purpose. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just getting lost because I've had some like private thoughts that I don't want to share on the stream that relate to this. So I'm trying to like ground myself in the moment.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
And some really strange experiences that.
You know, there are some.
But I like these are the conversations I've been wanting to have for like, I don't know, 15 years. So I'm happy to be here.
There are some. I'm sure there are scholars of many types that do this thing I'm about to say, but what I know of is that there are some Judaic scholars, Jewish scholars, who in their study of their scripture and whatever have come to the conclusion that God represents like the entirety of the universe, right? That like that everything which exists all kind of is a way of being able to conceptualize and discuss that is what's referred to as God. And so that
what is the utility of that God?
I'm not sure exactly in like in terms of being able to communicate. So like the statement, for example, that everything happens for a reason, which people will often interpret in our culture to mean something like even things that suck happen for a good reason. They pay off later or something like that. Or they're important or whatever, which I think is problematic statement, you know, to tell somebody when they're experiencing something bad to say it that way.
Yeah.
But if we look at it in that way, of like, that's a true theoretically statement that even if I don't know what the reasons are, meaning that in order for this thing to have fallen here, well, in the moment before it hit this, it was right here. And in the moment before that, it was here. You know, like each of those things must have been true. And gravity must exist in the way that it exists, and so on and so forth, right? That beyond our ability to understand the reason for things, that doesn't mean that there aren't reasons for things. So shifting that way of conceptualizing it, to me, makes that statement into something that is much more useful. This is something that comes up in therapy with people a lot, is the idea that just because we can't identify the reason for something to happen doesn't mean that it is random and has no reason behind it.
So I guess I'm wondering, I don't know if we're responding to G31.
I don't know. I think that's part of what leads people to that.
I guess the pattern I'm noticing is I feel like you're like, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but like sort of like 75% answering some of these questions, and then I don't know.
I don't know. What do you mean? What does it feel like is missing? Do I think there's a creator, or if there isn't, why do I think people seem to yearn for something greater like that?
I feel like there are more aspects to your thought about why people yearn to have a creator that you haven't shared, but I also feel like I'm losing my I'm losing tracking this conversation because so many things you're saying, I'm like relating to experiences I had over the past like 48 hours, and then I'm getting like really distracted. So
maybe this is another way to
bias.
say it. I think that human thought is very limited. Like, we obviously generally don't think of it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about conceptually things like that makes it sound like it's sort of just an attempt to negotiate and move past our own feelings, like a death of a loved one, and it's sort of just to make yourself feel better. Is that your sort of view? I don't know if this sounds like I'm offended, but I'm not. I'm just genuinely curious.
I love that comment. Thank you. I love it when people clarify.
Yeah, no, I appreciate
it's
that.
So helpful.
I do believe that spiritual or not, that accepting something as being true, quote unquote, meaning like behaving as though some concept is true without direct observation of the fact that it is or isn't, is all about utility, right? Like,
and don't we sort of do that a lot at Effective Artistry?
Well, everyone does that all the time. You know, like, it is useful when I'm driving to act as though other drivers are going to stop at a red light. You know, you have to act as though the things you're assuming are true. If you can't, you literally could not act otherwise. You have to act. Making an assumption is not an active thing that people do. The phrase "make an assumption" or "assume," it makes it sound like it's active, like you decided to assume a thing. No, right now we are all assuming that gravity will continue to function for the next 5 minutes. And I can say that confidently because if we were not confident about that, if we thought that gravity was going to cease functioning within the next 5 minutes, we would be behaving very differently. Our behavior would not make any sense if we thought gravity was about to shut off. So that's what it means to make an assumption. You're behaving in the way that would make sense to behave if pretty much infinite things were given to be true, and any of those we can call an assumption that you're making. And those assumptions are about utility, yes. That if thinking something or believing something is useful to me, then I'll do it. And if it's neither useful nor like detrimental, then I will default to continuing in the way I've already thought. If it's something I don't think and it's not proven to be useful or detrimental, then I will continue to not think it. If it's something that I do believe and it's neither useful nor detrimental, I will continue to believe it. So yes, there's utility to that, but that's not a statement of whether or not these things are true or shallow or whatever. I mean, to me, the point of a lot of this stuff is that it is unknowable. It is an exercise in making choices that guide your behavior. If you believe in an afterlife, to use this example, right, that feelings move past our feelings like a death of a loved one to make yourself feel better. If you believe in the concept of an afterlife where you're reunited with loved ones, you behave differently than if you believe that doesn't happen. So all of these are they're things that shape our behavior, our thoughts, our emotions. It all comes down to those three things. We think, we feel, and we take action. And it's all these things. Thoughts impact emotions, emotions impact thoughts, behavior. All of them impact the other ones. I'm going to use the phrase "I don't understand," even though I can understand the factors that lead to this. I don't understand why people want to debate these things as though one part can be proven correct or incorrect. The whole point of these things is that they can't be proven, right? That if it was possible to prove it or not prove it, then it's not something we would be discussing in this way.
Well, do you think part of that is that for some people it can be more comfortable to think the things that I think that are useful to me within whatever frameworks I think them in are 100% truths and there is a right and a wrong?
A lot of the time, those things, those beliefs which are useful to a person, are only useful if that person actually thinks that they are true, not just something that they're acting as though it's true. And that's the part that is not necessary to me.
Which part isn't necessary?
That it has to be identified as definitively being true instead of I'm acting as though this is the case without being able to definitively state that it is. I think that's why faith gets talked about so much, and I'm getting off on all kinds of things.
I didn't realize too that it's 1:54 and I think
time.
You may have something happening at 2.
I'll say this. I think about this stuff I have the privilege of being able to think about this stuff way more than most people have the opportunity to.
And by able, do you mean essentially like more leisure time and leisure
I mean that it's
energy?
like I'm incentivized to do it. It's relevant to my work. Even this specific example right here, I'm at work right now.
Me too, and I love it.
This conversation is happening. So
yeah.
So I like and I enjoy it, and I've been thinking about and talking about these things from a young age, and so I've just had a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the more you think about anything, the more complex it becomes. That there's a joke of like, to an expert in a particular field, everything outside of their field is super simple, and why can't people just get it figured out? And everything in their field, if you ask them, they'll say, well, that's complicated, we don't really know.
Mm-hmm.
Which is my point earlier, that human cognition is way more limited than we generally recognize. Because if you do, it's really scary, at least at first, to think that like, oh, my ability to observe and think and conceptualize and whatever is very limited. I am wrong all the time. And even when I think things that are useful, when I make predictions that are borne out, that come true, they're still very limited. Meaning thought is abstract. It is symbolic representation. I talk about this stuff with people a lot, maybe not in these terms, but a phrase from philosophy again, the map is not the territory. That a map of the city that you live in is useful, and by definition, it is not the same thing as the city. It is an abstract representation that leaves out the vast majority of data, right? That like this room that we are in right now has all of this in it, all these sights and sounds and smells and all these things that exist. None of that is on a map. And the map wouldn't be useful if it was that, right? It would just be reality. The point is that dropping a lot of information and simplifying and abstracting things allows you to interact with and navigate those things much more efficiently, with better outcomes. It's super useful. But again, especially more and more as time goes on, I think we tend to think that our thoughts are exact mirrors of reality rather than just simplified representations of it. And so that's another part of my question about
is that a new comment?
Or my answer to the question. It is. But that's another part of my answer to the question about why are people incentivized or seem to yearn for this. A lot of these things, it's just there are concepts that the actual reality of it is way more than we could ever be aware of. And so humans have a tendency to like represent things with other things. That we represent the sun and its journey through the sky with the concept of a sun god, or we represent whatever, greed with, I think there's a reason that in all different cultures, including our current ones, we assign like certain individuals certain roles. They represent things to us. And so I think that's part of it too, is to actually really think deeply about the fact that there are infinite things beyond my ability to observe, much less control, that impact things in my life and whatever. Just the concept that like, yes, there's stuff that impacts me that I have no ability to control or observe. More or less is the same as there's things that are bigger than me, right? And then it becomes easier to conceptualize that in some condensed way rather than this big, complicated, whatever. I think the reason I'm curious because I'd like it to be true that there's something after this life, but I guess it doesn't matter in the sense that if it isn't true, I'm dead anyway and won't notice the difference at that point. I don't know if that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And some other time, maybe when I have more time, I would be happy to talk about my own experience of a lot of the things I'm talking about right now. When I first started like thinking about them, caused me a crap ton of anxiety. Like the idea that when you die, that's it. There's nothing. It's just oblivion. That's something that when you first, or at least when I first started thinking of that, bothered me a lot. And honestly, I still don't prefer to think of that. So my point is, you'd like it to be true that there's something after this life. then act as though there is.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody can say that there isn't. There's no
Mhm.
proof that there isn't. And if it helps you, if it impacts you in beneficial ways and desirable ways,
Mm-hmm.
then great. Because what's the other choice? Like, to choose to believe something that you like less?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's no proof for that belief either. This is what I need to try and, or I guess it would be beneficial to try and find better language to get this point across. But
Mm-hmm.
I've been trying to explain, including in writing to the staff recently, that
Mm-hmm.
there's no way to know what is true or not. When you really like fully go down this, I feel like that's sounding so ridiculous right now. But when you really like accept the limitation of our ability to observe and conceptualize and think and whatever,
Mm-hmm.
part of the reason it's so distressing is because there's a reason for all that way of thinking. There's
Mhm.
reasons to think that we can accurately think of all these things,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
then you can take action with confidence.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you start to think like, no, actually, I don't actually know anything for fact. I can't possibly know the actual full 100% truth.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that there's not like practical things in terms of what you do that you say, yeah, I know this, I know that.
Mm-hmm.
If we really explore it, do you technically 100% know? So anyway, the thing I keep trying to say is, no, you don't know what's going to happen.
Mhm.
You don't know what is true. You can't. You can't understand and predict things 100%. And you have to act as though you do anyway.
Mm-hmm.
You have to act as if the things that you think are true are true. You have to take the action that would make the most sense to take if the things that you think are true were true. And being able to kind of embrace that, what I think of as absurdity, to embrace the idea that like, I know I'm wrong about stuff, that even when my way of thinking is useful and accurate and whatever, it's still limited, and there are still things that impact me and that belief that I just don't even know about. I know I don't have all the information, and yet I'm going to act as though I do anyway.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make sense, but there's not another option. And when you can really embrace that, and I do think there are a lot of different spiritual kind of systems that talk about different language applied to this concept of just kind of going on faith, basically, right? That like, you don't know, but you got to do something,
Mm-hmm.
because not doing anything is also doing something. Sitting and staring at the paint on the wall is action. There is literally no option to not take action.
Mm-hmm.
So you just got to figure out what you think is best and go. And when you can embrace that, I do think everything gets better,
Mm-hmm.
because it makes it so that learning is a welcome thing,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to a painful thing.
Mm-hmm. Or like an insult or something.
Right. If I can only take action if I believe that what I think is true is actually true, then anytime things don't work out the way that I'm expecting them to or wanting them to, well, now I have to face this idea that maybe I was wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and that I shouldn't have done those things that I did, because remember, I'm operating under the premise that I should only take action when I know what is true.
Mm-hmm.
And so anything that goes
Eventually,
wrong,
you're just frozen then.
or very, very, very resistant to the idea that you were wrong, right?
Yeah.
That, like,
That's true. Yeah.
that when somebody says, oh, actually, I don't like those kinds of flowers that you got them, I prefer this other kind.
Yeah.
When you're thinking that way, it's like, dang, I was wrong. Oh, shoot.
Yeah.
And you feel terrible about it. Whereas when you can embrace this absurdity and you say, then instead you say, awesome. Obviously, I wouldn't have gotten this person flowers if I didn't want to get them flowers that they like. And now I have more and better information about what kind of flowers they like for next time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel wrong or bad or dumb for what I tried. I'm happy to know more and different and better.
I'm finding myself wanting to cut off the stream since I know you have something.
Yeah, I do gotta
4
get going.
minutes ago.
I
just want to say how grateful I am to the comments from G31. And is it Bastion Cider? Or
Bast and cider.
Bast and Cider.
Bast, like the ancient Egyptian goddess.
Oh my gosh. So anyway, it was really nice.
Me
Because
too,
I
I
think
appreciate
sometimes when you and I are talking, like I still have a blast, but it's nice to be like another person who has like opinions and thoughts and questions, and I feel like there was like a honesty in it that was really, I don't know, it was nice.
No, I
So
really
thank
appreciate
you.
it too. And it's an example of what I was just talking about, where this is the kind of stuff that I wouldn't normally talk about on the stream, and I'm only doing because somebody's asking and I'm being pushed to do something. And I wouldn't.
Oh, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you. As opposed to thinking, oh, I should have been talking about this stuff all along,
Mhm.
or reaffirming like, oh, no, people don't want to hear me talk about this. No, you want to hear and you're here.
I want
so I'm
to
going
hear
to
you
talk about it. And when other people are asking about other things, or when you're asking about other things, I'll talk about other things too.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a hard one to accept, to like a particular version of this is to act as though the things that people are telling you are true.
Yeah, that's really hard for me at times.
Right, because we all have times where we're like, nah, I think they're lying or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that in all circumstances, all the time, you should act as though what a person says is true.
Fast insider are my cats.
But in some instances, whatever. It's just when there's a time to do it, to act as though what they're saying is true, even if you think like, I don't think they're telling the truth.
Yeah.
It's uncomfortable to do.
Yeah.
And this is an example of that for me, that someone's saying they want to talk about spirituality, and I have things in my experience and in my belief system and whatever that I say belief system, talking about spirituality. I didn't mean like religion. I just mean in like the thoughts that I have and how
the
I
Brandon
operate.
system.
That thinking like, oh, that's not a thing for the stream. But when a person says they're interested, I don't think like, no, they're not really interested. Like, I'm going to act as though it's true. I'm going to act as though you all are telling me accurately as best you can. Anyway, I appreciate you all being here, and this is fun, and I'm happy to talk more about this stuff, even though I get very self-conscious about talking so philosophically and like abstractly and whatever. But yeah, I don't know if I could say the takeaway from this, it's you have to act as though the things you're thinking are correct while knowing that they are not. You got to act that way anyway, and as soon as you get information that suggests that you were incorrect, that way you welcome it. You're like, good, I knew I wasn't exactly right. I'm glad to know better now.
Mm-hmm.
And then you keep going anyway.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks you all.
Everyone.
Goodbye, everybody. See you next week.
Bye.
I said some of it, and I can say more. Come back next week or whenever you can, and I'm happy to talk about it more.
Yeah, I would love to hear more about it too.
There are some interesting ones that I've come to anyway.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you all. Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody.